Okay, so we're ready to go again. There is no echo right now. I'm hoping that when Fanthome joins in, it's still the same. And there I have a request from him. We should be able to start. Thank you everybody for joining in today, and thank you for being very patient. And I can again.
How's that?
We're okay, but I
Bye. Say that again.
I can hear myself in echo. At your end.
What do I do?
What device?
I'm on this a phone. Should I try the iPad?
Yeah, can you
please? Yes, I can try the iPad. Just give me 1 second. So I get out of here. What do I do? I get out of here.
Yeah, just it and close. I think I've realized in the last few weeks that maybe Instagram is not the perfect sort of, as much as everybody feels it's very convenient and it's a very engaging format. I think technology is, the technology of Instagram is not meant for this. Anyways, thank you everybody again for joining in. We're going to talk about architectural photography, and I do want to discuss, especially the fact that there, in times like today when everything is not, it's not so easy to shoot. It'll take a while for things to get back to normal. What is it that we can do as architects to get our projects documented, shot? And what is it that's really important that we need to sort of shoot? I think this is much better. And
Awesome.
yes, your device, Fanthome. So, yeah, now we're okay. Thank you so much for everybody. Thank you so much to everybody for being patient. Let's start. I think everybody knows who the gentleman here is, who's playing with his device. I will do a quick introduction.
Ensure that you guys can see me. Yeah, you can do the introduction.
We could see you. What are you trying? No, your camera is very clean. Don't worry about it.
Much better. Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much. So I want to quickly introduce. Everybody knows you already. National Award winner. India's probably first, or one of the few architectural photographers in India. Also loves birds. Loves shooting birds a lot. And
with the camera, Tanya. With the camera.
With the camera. Sorry. With the camera. Photographs birds as often as he can. I think that's a hidden passion that most people don't know about. Fanthome has. I have worked with him a lot, and which is why I felt that for the Epistle OPD session, wherein we are trying to reach out to the community and use this time to plan our work better, curate our work better, and sort of learn along the go, right? In these times when even shoots are not possible, what is it? And also in the process of making a building, at what point should one start thinking about photography? How does one take care of certain aspects when you start on the drawing board itself? And I think that's something that Fanthome and me have spoken about multiple times, that the shoot is necessarily not something that needs to happen when the building is finished. The shoot needs to start right at the beginning when you start on the drawing board. And I know Fanthome has a lot of sort of great insight onto that. So I thought it'll be good to share this conversation with everybody. And I have a brief structure like I do for all these conversations. We're going to first, I'm going to ask him to talk about his process, how he approaches his shoots, and he is very organized about it. So I think it will be good for young photographers, young architects to know how to approach this. And then I will ask you questions from an architect's perspective. What is it, if somebody is planning a shoot, what should they be concerned about? How can they plan themselves better? Also, if everybody cannot afford the great Mr. Fanthome, so what can they do? Give us small tips, Fanthome. Give everybody ideas on how they can plan and choose their work better. Hence, this conversation was strategic architectural photography and not just architectural photography.
I absolutely love the word strategic, and I was trying to think exactly what is so strategic in what we do, but anyway.
This is strategic. This is
strategic. Very strategic, guys. Okay. So,
So tell us about your process first. How do you approach a brief? How does Fanthome shoot?
okay. So, once all the initial emails and hi, how do you do? We have a building and all of that is out of the way. I think the first step is to try, is got nothing to do with the building that we are going to shoot. It's got more to do with the architect. It's trying to figure out the architect. It's not the building at all, because the building is just how should you put it? It's like for a painter, no? It's one painting out of many paintings. So it's one building out of many buildings that an architect is going to produce in their lifetime. And like with painters, all artists and architects, according to me, are just artists who work with concrete, steel, and mud and other stuff. But at the end of the day, they're artists, they're creators. And to be able to share their story, which is our job as filmmakers and photographers, we need to know who we are talking about. I mean, without that, it's just a building, it's just a work of art. If you look at any particular work of art without knowing the background as to why the work was created, what was going on, and you were to just look at a piece at a painting or something, there's that much depth to it. It's just on the surface. But if one is really looking at taking the story forward, then the most important thing is what were the designers? They went about designing this building. So the first and most important thing is to get to know the firm, the architects, the designers who are involved in what are their points of view, how they look at things. Once you've got the architects in your, so to speak, that part is taken care of and you've understood what they're doing, then you progress to the building, because you know what it is that they want to tell through your photographs. What is the story that they want people to appreciate? And then you go about understanding the building. Now, this is tied to the question you asked earlier, at what point do you start? And I'm very happy that you put the point that, at the drawing, when it's on the drawing board. And there have been a couple, very few cases where we've actually been able to do this. Before the ground was broken, we started documenting. The tricky part in these things is that they go on forever. And they are long projects. One that hopefully should see completion in the... Beg your pardon? I didn't hear you, Tanya.
Architecture. Especially architecture.
Yeah, I mean with architecture.
Especially architecture.
Yeah, we've been documenting the camellias, for example, the DLF camellias in Gurgaon, before the first JCB excavated the first on that flat piece of land and watched it grow. But it's been a long process, and we've been doing it right from the beginning till now, and it's still going on. Thanks to COVID, it stopped for a while, but it'll still be going on till it's completed. So it's a long process. And the real fun of architecture, the real story or the real value add that architecture brings, I don't believe can be fully captured in those last photographs when the lawns are plush green and the flowers are all blooming and the paint is all dried up and the furniture's moved in. That's the final outcome. But the architecture is in the steel, in the cement, in the excavations, in the grime and dirt and sweat. And if you leave that out, I think architects do themselves a disservice. If you want people to appreciate your art, then you need to show your art. And your art is not what is, on the surface. Your art is inside. How your cantilevers hold up a building. That is the art. And that gets hidden behind, escalators and glass facades and other things that keep coming. And once, of course, the people who own the building come in and everyone is an interior designer and architect of their own accord. And then they'll go on to make changes, which ultimately just hides all the work that the architect has done. And if you can't see the beams that support the floors above, what have we done to the architecture? So that story is very, very, very critical. There are a couple of architects who have agreed, and Saurabh is one of them. And one of the most beautiful parts of the building that I photographed in Lucknow, the JP and IC, is now not visible to anybody. It's how the pillars come up from the ground, go up, I think, to the 8th floor, then suddenly disappear to create this quadruple volume with no beams, this huge space for a restaurant, and then suddenly start, once that box is closed in, from above the box again, Arcom's taken those pillars up all the way to the, I think, 20th floor, however tall that building is. Now, that's architecture. But once the glass is up and you're sitting and dining, you're not going to see those beams. So it's very important to understand the architect first, then start with the architect. It's something that you do together. Most of the time, we are called as an afterthought, so to speak. Once the building's ready, like, okay, now let's find a photographer. And the best of the photographers is not, you don't get to see so much. And I mean, if you see a full building, and no matter how many drawings you go through, that visual realization of the story only happens when you see a raw building. I mean, nobody can tell you the cantilevers are why and, balancing this or balancing that. So I think for architects, it's something that they should, do simultaneously as the process continues. Both visually, it's much more interesting and intriguing. And the most important part is you're telling a story. And if you miss out, the introduction, the body, and you just stick with the conclusion, basic essay writing that we were taught when we were kids, it's lost, I feel.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is exactly the point that I actually talk about in this. Because as architects, we are very trained, put up right from school days, we make our concept drawings at the end, just before our juries, right? Of course, a lot of people now have gone back and realized that, that is post-production. What really the true narrative, like you said, the art starts on the drawing board. So could you maybe share an example of a project where the fact that you started from the drawing board, the narrative of the project also changed as you sort of went along with the project, right? Because you were shooting, let's say you shot right at the beginning of the team, how they work, the models, the drawings, the process of the brainstorming, and the team, how the architects put together the project. Of course, there was that journey, and then there is a journey of the building coming up. Have you experienced that in your journey at some point?
No, I mean,
we've discussed it many a time. It's a great book, right? It's a great idea for a book. But yeah, what are the challenges that you think? Or let's say somebody wants to do it, right? But they can't do it because obviously logistics, financial, budgets, all of that, especially today, it becomes really relevant. How does one approach that sort of strategy? I mean, how does one plan this?
It's a tough one. But to answer the first question that you came up with, and when you were talking before that, I was just thinking about it. You talked about, your concept drawings in college and 4th year and 5th year jury would come at the end of, when you've already got your whole submission
night
together.
Before.
Yeah, because the whole idea or your story or whatever you're creating constantly changes. You'll have one friend walk in and say, oh my God, what are you doing? You forgot this, what you were taught here. You can't be doing this. And then you wake up and you're like, okay, let me improve it. Because there's this constant thing running on your head that, till the last minute, you need to constantly make improvements so that you get good marks at the end of the day. And it's the process, everything is completely in your control. You're both client as well as creator. And then you put that out for the jury to decide. In real life, though, it's a little, my experience has been a little different. That I can't say that design hasn't been changed. I know of cases where projects have gone through 21, revisions in design and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I wasn't part of those conversations. I remember having discussion with Lotus, for example, that, all of that evolution of the design is a very important part, and should be part of a story. For example, you have Lotus's very famous project, the RAS, and you talk to the client, Nikhil, who's now become a friend of mine, and he tell you about how many times they just, revisited and revisited and revisited the whole thing. Unfortunately, I wasn't, so involved in that process back then. So I wasn't able to document it. Of the projects that I have documented, there hasn't been much alteration. I mean, what was decided right in the beginning is what has been carried out. But even if that was the case, I think it's a very beautiful part, because that is what architecture is. I mean, it's a creative process. And if you learn something along the way that leads you to increase the height of a particular wall or to create a volume in a particular place, that is architecture. I mean, that's just the whole story of a building, not what you see at the end of it. So I think if that is what happens when you design a building, then document that as well. I mean, it would be perfect. Now, coming to the logistics, of which financials are a big big part of this whole thing. It is a daunting task. One cannot deny that. But I mean, if you can't go all the way, then to some extent, I mean, these are incremental steps that everybody takes. Earlier we used to just do one shoot. Now then you started doing two, like one midway, one at the end. Then you start doing three, and then you start doing four, and then maybe one every quarter, and then you learn as you go along. But this is something, while I would say it'd be great to engage, one of us architecture photographers to do it for you, this is something architects can do a lot and are doing a lot on their own. I mean,
that's what I want to touch upon.
Yeah.
I will touch upon that later as well, that I think a lot of stuff can be done by the architects themselves.
And they're doing it. They are already doing it. I mean, the photographs that come off one of these latest iPhones, for example, or the OnePlus phone. I mean, it's mind-blowing. Sometimes one looks at that screen and wonders, will the final processed image that you've taken on equipment that costs lakhs and lakhs live up to what you're actually looking at on a phone? And you're like, oh God, what type of world are we living in now? And you're just thinking to yourself. So, I mean, Jaydev in Cochin and I, when we were on our last trip, we were constantly comparing, photographs, and he was showing off his iPhone and telling me, you need to invest in this, boss. This is the new world. And it's true.
Can I be honest? A lot of people who come to us and say that, we cannot afford photography for all our projects, I tell them, you invest in an iPhone 10, it's 1 lakh rupees in India. You have a good eye. As an architect, you've been trained to look at details. Go shoot yourself. At least your documentation will be complete, right? Yes, you will have a project, and then you can invest resources. And until you can't professionally hire somebody, you at least shoot with a great phone. Because that 1 lakh rupees of investment is going to, it's creating a portfolio for you. And that is most crucial, at whatever stage of the practice you are, your portfolio is still your tool for outreach.
Absolutely. No, and more important, I think, as architects also, when you document your own work through the process, you're able to look back and learn from your own, your own project is a good teacher to you as to, what you could improve moving forward, how you could do things differently. And the phones, I mean, back in the day, sorry, sound old now, but when we used to shoot film, there was a lot of technical knowledge that you needed to have, because you could not, see whether you've messed it up then and there, number one. Number two, I mean, if you messed it up, by the time you knew you had messed it up, all that's past. So with the new digital cameras, I mean, you can review your work instantaneously, even if you're shooting with a DSLR or any other camera, forget a phone. So you know the mistakes you're making, and with all this live view mumbo jumbo that's there now, you don't need to have so much technical knowledge anymore with regard to settings on a camera. I mean, there are basic things which will take half an hour on any YouTube channel, then there are hundreds of them out there that you would know, what basic settings to put. So that part, that huge technical aspect is gone with the new cameras and with your phones and the rest. So once you've got that out of the way, it's just about your eye. And yes, photographers over a period of time, we specialize in being able to better communicate than maybe even the architect a particular scene or a particular emotion or a particular story. But if you can't get somebody to come and document this at regular intervals, you can very easily do it with your phone. I mean, the quality of imagery that is coming out of, like you mentioned, this iPhone 10, and then there's this OnePlus 7, which has 3 lenses, for example, a 17, 24, and a 50. You keep swapping between lenses, and then you check. I've actually used that camera, that phone, to look at scenes and say, oh, okay, now give me this lens at times, just to check whether how well they match up, and they match up pretty well. So yeah, you could invest in a phone and document it, because those moments are moments. I mean, you just can't let them go, and that's what builds a story of your building. I mean, even if you think about it, if you're going to talk to to a client, and you show them a finished photograph of a building, and then you tell them you want to try something, like maybe use of a particular brick for insulation, or maybe how a cantilever would look. I keep getting back to cantilevers. I love them. Without those raw photographs, how do you communicate that to the client? I mean, how do you explain to the client why something needs to be a particular way if you don't have that imagery? I mean, it's just words then at the end of the day. And if you have imagery, it's so much easier. So yeah, invest in a phone. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely invest in a phone. Do not buy a DSLR camera at all, because 99.9% it's going to end up in your cupboard, because it'll be too bulky to carry around, because you'll have a meeting next, or you'll have something else to do next. So do not buy a DSLR camera. Don't make that mistake. Leave that to the pros. We'll waste our money out there. You guys just buy phones. Yeah, it's more than enough. It's
phone
much
do you
more
use?
than enough.
Tell everybody, what phone do you use?
I have a OnePlus, not 7, the one before 7, 5T or something. Yeah, 5 or something.
And
Yeah, so
does that suffice if you're not using your DSLR? Does it suffice?
Suffice, as in,
does it take care of your photography needs?
No. My needs are holding a camera and looking. So my need is completely different. A phone can't bring out those same emotions in me as a camera. So I think if I didn't have a camera, yes, it does. I have taken photographs on them and borrowed lots of people's iPhone 10s. Usually photographers don't make so much money, so we can't afford these expensive phones. But yeah, I've borrowed lots of people's iPhones and shot with them. Jaydev, of course, is my favorite when it comes to iPhones. And then I think not so long ago, I borrowed Malvika's phone when Saurav and Malvika visited us while we were shooting at night, the museum under construction museum in Agra. And we took photographs in the moonlight with that damn iPhone, and they were outstanding. And I was worried after that. There I was doing a 10-minute exposure, 15-minute exposure, and then one take with the iPhone, click, and it's all done. And you're like, what am I doing? Like, just what am I doing? So yeah, phones are excellent nowadays. Yeah. So you don't have to wait for a DSLR.
But phones will not replace what you do, right? Because like we said, that there is also an eye to detail, and there is an end product that one needs. So do you feel that you get, just from this is again a very personal sort of opinion that I'm looking at. I want you to tell us, is it better for you when you sort of drive your own brief for a project? Or would you rather that the architect drives the narrative, because they are the ones who have gone through the journey of design?
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, there's no doubt about it.
I mean, there's the easier words for a brief, or would you rather just go and shoot and nobody having to tell you anything?
Absolutely not. We do not own that narrative. We are there just to help, assist, communicate somebody else's idea. We do not own the narrative. The narrative is not ours at all. And that's why I said the most important thing is to get to know your architect. Make your architect your friend, the one you're working with. That's the only way. so that you can actually discuss things and point out things to them that they also may be missing. It's a very collaborative thing. Yeah. The architect tells you what they are talking about and tells you who their target audience is, who they want to talk to, what story they want to tell, etc., etc. They tell you the story, then you ask them questions. Of course, every photographer has their own likes and dislikes that then contribute to that conversation, and then you go on and use your skill and experience to translate that conversation into audiovisual product, as a photograph or a film. But that best way I could put it is that, there's an executive, and we photographers, we are the sous chef in this creation of the narrative. I mean, they are the ones who are basically looking at how to cook it. All of that we'll do. That's our job. But that executive chef needs to basically say that, yes, today it's this pasta or that pasta that we are serving because so and so group is coming somewhere and they need to eat this. Sorry, food always has to get into my conversations. So yeah, that's the way I look at it. So no, it's completely the architect's story. We are only there to assist, translate their story into audiovisual products. That's it.
Yeah, so I think also in my experience, I've also noticed that I think architects who have the narrative in place, right, at least in their mind, and then they drive it and they're engaged in that, I think the end product also shows, right? Otherwise, there are times when if you don't, if I mean, we all know, right? There could be instances where photographers given a brief, right? That okay, there's this building, go shoot it. And if the architect does not drive that, connect the dots of that narrative, then the outcome may not be as per what the intention was. And then the photography is sort of left to the reader. Where you can.
I wouldn't say maybe. I will say then the outcome is not. I will actually make it a very definitive, because I mean, these days there are a lot of architecture photographers, unlike me, who are trained architects, right? So that's a very good thing. But even looking at drawings, the final drawings, do not explain the whys. It's just explain how it's done. And what or how is not important. I mean, that is not at all important. It's the why, because that answer to that why for a client, it got done for Mr. Gupta's house, but that why will also take it forward to Mr. Khanna's house. That why is important. And if you miss out on the why, I mean, it could be a fluke. Yeah. A particular building could be a fluke, and what builds credibility for an architect or any professional for that matter is consistency, a consistency of thinking. And if you've done it in one building and you've done it in the second building and you've done it in the third building, using that narrative, you can basically convince your client that you are a thinking architect. You're somebody who's concerned about whatever it may be, conservation, this, that. It doesn't matter what the topic is, but you're basically showing a trend that you as an architect are a thinking artist, a conscious artist. And for that purpose, I think it's very important.
Also, I feel that, a lot of times if you don't think about that narrative from the architect's perspective, then there is a huge gap between what your drawings are saying, what your write-up is saying, and what your photographs are saying. And personally, I've experienced that many times that the photography is completed, and you sort of go back and look at the write-up, and there was this point that the photographs need to communicate, but we don't have a photograph to show it.
Exactly. Right? Exactly.
So,
exactly.
In that sense, that's why I'm sort of coming back repeatedly to I think the brief from the architect for me is the start point. And
absolutely.
I think that's.
And,
so I think
and I want to add something out here that we've had a lot of luck in the recent past with bullying all our friends to send somebody on site when we are shooting. And usually I like the principals themselves to come, but it's not really always feasible. But having somebody who has worked on the project, being there when you're shooting, in an office environment, no matter how hard you try, they will remember about the design. Particular architect however junior or that particular architect might be, when that architect is with you on site, then memories come up. This was changed by so and so because something like this happened here or something like that happened there, and then that helps you. Then it's sort of, you feed on that story, and then create imagery that then carries forward that story in your imagery. But this is a request, not just for people who shoot with me, but for all to all architects, regardless of who you're shooting it. Take the time to invest in sending somebody to site to work with the photographer. The value add that one day will make to the imagery and to the final product there's just no question about it. So yeah, all architecture photographers can thank me later, but yeah, do send somebody.
No, I think it's most important, and it saves everybody the heartache. It saves everybody the heartache of. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Yeah.
I think there's a. Yeah. Right? If you do it right the first time, then you've sort of got it right, and that's what you want. Otherwise, you're sending a photographer back, or you're sort of eventually you feel that the project has not been communicated well, and our job is to communicate the project well. I think together, if the architect or somebody in their team can spare the time and get it right in the first place, along in sync with the brief and the narrative of the project, then the job is actually done. There's nothing left. I'll come to my next question, Fanthome. How does one plan? I mean, we've discussed that the architect can sort of. Can you not hear me?
I couldn't hear the beginning of the question. I can now. Okay. I can. I couldn't hear you. In the beginning.
So I was saying that how does one? What are the 2 or 3 stages that one should look at shooting when you're planning a project shoot?
So I mean, depending upon how what resources are available to you, both in terms of how much you want to invest in this thing, and it's just a question of whether you think it's worth it or not. Every architect can. Okay, so let's just get over the fact of whether or not architects can afford photographers, or not. Everybody can. It's a question of do you see value? Is it a worthwhile investment or not?
Yeah.
So if I had to do just one shoot, it would be the last shoot. If I could do 2 shoots, it would be one at the end, one midway. If I could do 3, then it would be one when it's virgin soil, bare soil, and then midway, and then at the end. So it all depends as to how many of these shoots we are willing to invest in, and it's an investment on both sides. We also need to be very.
I'd like to add something to it. I would add a 4th shoot, which is 6 months later or a year later, when the site has gone through a cycle of landscape, the trees blooming, the landscape sort of coming up, because just when the project finishes and it's on site, right, and you go to site and you're doing handover to the client, it's bare. No matter how many trees you bring in from outside, it's still bare. It's not a natural site. A year later or 6 months later, when one weather change has happened, I think the site really looks what it is. Of course, it's not possible, but
what is not possible? Everything is possible. What matters is, do you want to do it? So this whole impossible, can't do business, I do not buy that with regard to anything and everything in life. It's a question is, do you want to? So very interesting question you asked me. But over the winter, I think we started back in October, and all the way into January, while everybody was freezing out here in Delhi, I was in Bangalore. And what were we shooting? We were shooting everything that Total Environment had done. So there were projects that were 10 years old and 15 years old. And yes, the creepers' roots had sort of got into the pergolas. And yes, there were things hanging here and hanging there. that otherwise would have been pristine, sterile, well cast, exposed exposed brick and concrete, and all of that would have been there. But when you look at it so many years later and you see how the building has aged and the colors are as they were and stuff like that, it has a whole different story. I mean, that work, which is only we have just started processing it. And for those of you who are not following Kamal, you should follow Kamal. He's putting these photographs up on a regular basis now. It's very nice to see a principal actually taking so much time and interest in doing it themselves, which many people are. It's a completely different story. It's a completely different ball game. Photographing buildings that have been around for 10, 15 years, and now you're shooting what it is like today. It has its challenges. Like for us, I think the biggest challenge in Bangalore with total environment were the pigeons and the pigeon nets that residents have put around their buildings, which sort of make our life like hell. You don't want to show a lovely, brick building with exposed concrete covered up with a net of pigeons. I mean, so it does have its challenges. It does have its challenges. You don't get those clear-cut views of the corners and of the facade, because now the foliage has covered up everything. So it has its own challenges, but that's a different story in a book. It's a different chapter. It has a different taste to it, or a different nuance to it, if you want to call it. So you can't compare that with what you're going to shoot, right? Around handover, for example. As you said, the building will look great, but the landscape architect who has spent a lot of time. The same thing happened when we were shooting in Bangalore, Bijoy's BIC. We did a fantastic shoot, and recently when I went to visit it a year later, now the landscape has just come to life. It's green all over, and that whole outdoor experience is now a completely different experience. And even the indoor experience in the main reception, that earlier you could look at the labor camp, or you could look at that filthy drain flowing past and the jali. Now it's just lush green. So you get that feeling of an oasis now, which is so different to that feeling and emotion that I went through when I shot it a year back, when the landscape hadn't taken as yet. So I think it's very, very good that you brought up that point, that yes, maybe 2 years or a year, depending upon how fertile the soil is, you go and then shoot the place again. I think it would be very, very valuable. And then you can also see how the inhabitants, the people for whom the spaces were designed, are using those spaces. I mean, we did that with Lotus, with Krushi Bhavan also. How the spaces are being used now, not just the finished building with the fantastic graphic work and the design and the carving. All of that is there. But how is it being used? Because ultimately every building's purpose is what? How is it going to be used, right? So it's you can't just take one aspect and forget the others. I think there is a lot of scope in documentation. There's a lot of areas that can be documented, right from under construction, how the thing comes to life, the finished product, and then how it is being used, how the building comes to life itself once people start occupying the spaces in there. So I mean, it's endless. I mean, you could just go on, on and on and on.
I also think design elements, it could be a corridor, it could be a jali, it could be a courtyard. I mean, these are all elements. If they're shot at different stages, they are what add meaning, right, to the design. So I think that gets captured through the process, and it's fabulous, really.
Yeah, without that, I mean, there's so much more to a building than what I would call a brochure shot.
Yeah. Speaking of brochure shots, and I'm going to use that point to now move on to questions. We've already done 45 minutes. We've extended our talk for much longer, but I'd like to address all the questions that people have.
Okay.
I have one already, because we ran a poll and we asked people what their questions were. What is the trend currently in terms of blurry figures? There was a point when blurry figures were in trend. Then
we have kids. Manisha Doshi online. Wow.
And then there were kids who were, trending at one point in architectural shots. What do you think is the trend right now? Have you moved from blurry figures?
I don't know. I mean, I
What is
have
yours?
you moved from blurry figure. See, everything depends on the architect that you're working. For me, having human beings in an architectural photograph, for me mostly is about a sense of scale. And that maybe because I myself am so in love with the volumes and spaces. I don't know. I mean, that's how I like it. If there's a human being, the person better not attract too much attention. The focus should remain on the design. The person should be there just for the sake of scale. If you blur them out, if that's the trend, blur them out. It's a very simple thing. You tell the person, I'm going to take the photograph now, walk when I tell you. The person thinks you're crazy, he'll walk. The photographer's gone mad, and the photographs come and they're like, oh, so this is what you were trying to do. I can't even see my face. And they're like really disappointed that after all that effort, all you have is a ghost in the image. Like, I mean, that all depends on the architect and what's happening. And what's the story, how they like to do it. In some cases, if you were to shoot an amphitheater, for example, it would look so nice if you had more than just one person.
Yes.
Yeah. Although there is an amphitheater that I've shot where I've just put one person in one corner. She was sitting and the whole place is out there. But if you want to really show a large amphitheater, fill it up with people, and then, if you can't get permission, take a drone shot. That brings the whole place into life because you're really showing how the place will come to life and how big it is. And you also very subtly communicate how much the seating is and how many people can, it accommodates. So there's lots of different messagings that happen. But it all goes back to the simple thing, what's the architect's likes, dislikes, what is the style that they like, and you just help them with creating their story by bringing your skill set and experience into the game.
Yeah, fair enough. We have another question that somebody asked. What is your full frame body model and your most useful lens for architectural photography?
My favorite lens has just been retired, and I've bought its replacement. It was a 45mm tilt shift lens from Khanna. Now the new 50mm tilt shift lens has come, which I've just purchased and really haven't shot with. That would be, I've just done, I think, used it twice, but it's just a replacement of the 45mm, and that would be without doubt my favorite. What is a full frame camera body? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay, so well,
body model, full frame body model. Yeah.
Okay, what do I use? I use 5D SRs. I use 5D SRs, 6Ds, 5Ds. There are a whole bunch of them. I mean, I've invested a lot
of your money in cameras. We all know that.
In equipment. I mean, when you put those boxes up together and I have them, they stand taller than me. So yeah. So for me, I don't know if you're asking this to me from like a business or a professional point of view. I really don't know if it's that great an idea whether to rent or to purchase. I'm just telling you my side of the story. So it's very difficult for me to answer which camera. It all depends on what's happening, and you just pick up whatever body you sort of fits the bill for that particular shot.
Sure.
Can you just give me 1 second?
Go ahead.
Hello. I'll call you back if it's not too urgent, please. No. Oh. Sorry. Yeah.
Now, another question that I would ask you is, obviously the world has changed. We all have smartphones in our hands. There is also a lot of content and documentation. I mean, content curation and documentation that is for social media consumption. And the lines, as we have also moved into the world of social distancing, the content overload in digital media and social media has gone, it's totally gone overboard, and there's no boundary anymore, right? How do you, as a photographer, as somebody who's capturing narratives, how do you curate and stop and, draw that line and say, this is when it stops, this is when it should stop, and this is where it's becoming overload, or this is where it's becoming, just too much, and it's just now it's just a bunch of photographs and nothing more. I'm sorry for being controversial about it, but I've had this
No,
conversation
no.
with many
I,
people,
I, I,
especially in the
I,
last
I
1 month.
find it. I find it really amusing that you, of all people, are asking me about social media, knowing my track record. Um, I really don't know what to say about social media. I think I'm like, I still don't have my act together. Anybody who follows me will see that I post for like a week when somebody like Tanya gives me a dose. And once I feel like she's off my back, or whichever friend has called me is off my back, then I stop posting because I just don't post. I mean, I find this whole social media thing, it's something that I have not really been able to. I see the value. I mean, this talk is a good example that I see the value in it. But I don't know. I'm a photographer, and I think I got onto this whole Instagram stuff much later than most people who started even a decade after me. They were already on Instagram before I very reluctantly got on. And then when I got on, as Tanya mentioned, since I do wildlife and documentary photography also, I have 3 different accounts. I don't know how smart that is. Recently, I have finally decided that maybe I'll just have one account, and it'll be easier to handle that way. I really don't know, but social media has its advantages. I mean, that is where the conversations are taking place right now. I mean, Instagram, we've got work from Instagram. Something that, initially when my team used to tell me that I need to put more stuff on Instagram, I'd be like, for what? Like, why are you making me waste my time? And we've got several leads. I shouldn't even call them leads. We've actually gone and shot for clients who basically found us on Instagram, and all the initial conversations also have happened in that messaging part of Instagram. It's that bad.
Disturbing though, but yeah, I know what you're
No,
saying.
it is.
Yeah. It's
Disturbing.
easy.
It's just a change. It's just a change,
Easy
and we are
conversation.
used to a different type of platform to converse with, either through the phones or through emails. And now there is this new thing. So social media does have its advantage. Now, does it work for business? Absolutely does. I mean, there is Sarah from Bombay, when we were together at that. You were also there with us when we were talking at Foy, and she says she can't imagine life without. I mean, her business. I mean, she really, and she does a superb job about it. But the thing is that with every act or anything that one does, there's a huge price to pay. And are we willing to make that investment? That is the real question. I mean, anybody who's putting in so much time into social media pays a huge personal cost also to be able to do it. And it's a big investment. So I can't downplay that. Like, I'm not willing to make that investment. I'm just not willing to make that investment. I lead a very private life. And for me, that's very important, to be able to do what I do. And somebody else may be able to share a slice of their life. And that is a big give that they are giving both to the community and to everybody. So social media, where do you draw the line? I really don't know, because...
So I think my question is more sort of based on content. Do you now get more requests for, we don't need highly processed images.
Oh, yeah.
Just give us the raw images, we'll use it on social media. That's what I meant.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to explain to people that, no, we can't give you unprocessed images, because with your name goes my name too. So I need to take it up to a certain standard and then only give it to you. So yeah, I mean, hi Brijesh. That is very, very important for everybody, because if you really look at the way social media works, it's a very hungry beast, insatiable appetite. And if you want to, I mean, the way the algorithms or whatever it is that works, if you look at people's thing, you need to feed it. It's constantly demanding more and more and more and more content. And that's how you sort of
thrive. That's the only way to
rise
thrive.
to the top, or your visibility. And so I really don't know where you would draw the line. But the thing is that, like, if you look at it, like, you had Orkut, and then you had Facebook, and right now you have Instagram. When you use these things to the extent that they are being used, they sort of reach a threshold, and then they basically start declining, which is
what has happened with Facebook already.
Yeah.
It's going to happen with Instagram, and LinkedIn is what is going to rise.
And then LinkedIn will die, and then there'll be something new that will come up, and then that will also die. I mean, these things all are in cycles. Right now, there's so much stuff going on with Instagram, and so much, I would say, there's so much noise out there that you're right. I mean, maybe everybody's going to drift into LinkedIn or some new app that's going to come up, which will basically cut out the noise. Because if you look at the transition from Facebook to Instagram, one of the main things was that, to cut out all the writing and the blah, 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 and just stick with the photograph, because people were getting fed up of writing. So maybe that's why Instagram grew. I mean, I'm not a social scientist, but I mean, the way I look at it, so maybe that will then lead to LinkedIn, where conversations are more pertinent to the topic. And, we are not talking about, the cooler you had for lunch while you were sitting outside waiting for your client and stuff like that. I mean, things will change. So, I mean, it's very different.
Also, I feel that for architecture studios, I mean, because we're talking about architects, yes, the reason why you're using social media is for visibility, it's for recall. If you also bombard with content, right, then the recall is lost.
Absolutely.
And curation is still key, because if there's too much of even your work, the recall is lost, right? It's just, you're just scrolling up literally on Instagram. That's what you do.
So, I mean, if you are going to put out 100 photographs about a particular project, I'm not saying that if you put out 100, they'll be lost. But if each one of those hundreds is not worth their weight in gold, then that will happen. So it's not just about how much. It's, are you able to maintain that quality or not? That is really what counts. I mean, and ultimately, I think since I saw Brijesh out here, I mean, there is one thing that I really want to say. No documentation whatsoever can replicate visiting a building. I mean, so let's not start thinking that buildings are now just going to live on Instagram and social media and print media, and that's the new world order for architecture. No, it just cannot happen. We photographers and filmmakers, and with all the respect that the industry has given me, we do a shitty job of what it really is like to stand in a space and experience what the building does to you. It's like a 10% thing.
Thank you for saying that so honestly. I share something with you that, I think I've mentioned it to a lot of people. I'm an architect, right? And I believe in the power of communication, but I cannot replace what you feel when you go to a building. So I remember many years back, about 8 years back, I went to see the Maxi Museum by Zaha, right, in Italy. And it's not in the center of Rome. It's really like sort of at the outskirts, right? And my very kind husband dragged me early in the morning because we had a flight to catch later. And he said, no, we must see it. It's a fabulous building. We must see it. And we both went there. We hadn't had breakfast. We just sort of literally walked all the way and took a bus and did all of that. And we reached and we were like, what crap is this? I mean, I'm sorry, but the building turned out to be nothing like what it was shown in the form of photographs and write-ups and whatever. And it's not, I think what I would say it's a crap building, but I think it created a false impression of what the spaces are. And I think that is somewhere where, again, I feel that the onus is on the architect and the photographer to capture the essence of what the building is. A building can be, the photographs can be manipulated to show that, oh, this is a great public building. If you don't cover the true aspects of the building, then, I mean, if you don't, every building has its strengths, or there is a reason why the building works, right? You mentioned the BIC. So, I mean, that is one building. There are core elements of the building that work. And that is the essence that needs to be captured through the photography.
Yeah, so I mean, the best way I think to look at this process, again, talking about food, right? So
we know your love for food.
Yeah, love for food. Yeah, absolutely. So it's like this: you can get onto Zomato or online or whatever it is, and you see these lovely photographs of food, right?
Yeah.
You can't eat them. You need to get the food to be able to eat it. So similarly, what we do with a building is we just sharing a trailer or I mean, trying to attract you to come and actually experience the building. But in no way can a photograph on Zomato or any Swiggy or any other app compare with with actually eating the food. They're completely different things. So if we start living in a world where we think architects are going to work in their offices and design buildings that are then going to be constructed somewhere and then show up on social media or any media, and that's how architecture is going to be experienced, that's not the experience. The wind blowing in your face when you're standing out there at the BIC as it flows over the water, that's architecture. Pearl Academy of Fashion in Jaipur, those sunken courtyards with the water in them, that morphogenesis created, that is architecture. I mean, that feeling that you get when you're standing in front of Ras and you see how this plush new 7-star resort sort of blends in with the surrounding area, and you can hear the azan in the background and feel like you're in the middle of the old city. That is architecture. I mean, how all these things are brought together. That's architecture.
You experience that in a still.
Yeah. You have to experience that. You cannot. No photograph can do. They can only like tickle you or like attract you. But the ultimate joy of architecture is actually breathing, standing there, and seeing how what that particular work of art, if I may call it so, what that work of art does to you. How it changes the way you feel when you're standing there. Do you feel when you're walking through the corridors of this Doshi's building, Professor Doshi's building, the Bangalore IIM, that we recently visited as part of that? Just walking through that, to see how a group of artists have expanded those spaces and those volumes, sort of brings within you also a sort of like a supplementary creative process where your mind also then starts opening up and expands. When you're like sort of encouraged to do that, when you see how the trees and you have these huge volumes and that whole feeling, like even when I'm talking to you right now, my whole posture's changed because I'm reliving that experience that a photograph cannot do, and it's not supposed to do. The most important thing I want to say is not supposed to. We try our best to take you and help you experience what we did as creative professionals in those volumes that were created by architects. But that is no supplement or no replacement for actually going to the trouble of taking the permission and going and standing in that corridor that Professor Doshi has created for you and feel it. So yeah, sorry, got carried away.
We are going to get disconnected in 1 minute. I would request.
Why?
Because Instagram does not allow. We've done 1 hour, so Instagram does not allow. So right. I still had one question left. So maybe we all can just reconnect for a minute. And
so